Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Substance, starring Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, and Dennis Quaid, directed by Coralie Fargate. Now, before I get into this movie, I've seen it before, and what do I think of it? It'll probably be the same as I think of it now, but I won't talk about what I thought of it at first. So let's get into the movie. We start the movie with an egg that gets poked and grows into two, which is the idea of the movie, and we move on to a star of fame of for Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, along with Fernanda Torres from I'm Still Here, as one of them will definitely get the Best Actress Oscar. But the question is who, as it lies on the ground and it gets crushed and shot with potatoes and photos with, excuse me, and spilled hamburger dressing on, as she has a TV show called Sparkle Your Life, where she does exercises on the show, and it's her 50th birthday, and she uses the restroom as the ladies' room is out of order and doesn't have a choice but to go into the men's room, and she goes while her boss Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid, wants to replace her with someone young and hot. While he's taking a leak and doesn't wash his hands, and I'm thinking, this motherfucker is sick! Like the character Michael Shannon played in The Shape of Water. And he eats shrimp with his dirty hands in the next fucking scene while the guy is talking with his fucking mouth full, and he puts Elizabeth's shows off the air and goes to a friend of his at the restaurant where while there's a fly in her glass of wine. As I'm thinking, what kind of a restaurant is this place? As they do things on the disgusting side, as they should be shut down for that to begin with. And I'm just gonna show my hand at this point. I don't like the characters too much, as they come off despicable and disgusting, in my opinion. Elizabeth gets into an accident while she's driving and goes to the hospital, and she makes it out alive and is offered by a nurse a thing called the substance, which I will bring up what it does in a few minutes. As Elizabeth gets out from the hospital and bumps into an old friend from high school named Fred, and he gives her his number, and he drops it on a wet ground, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what kind of movie is this so far? As they do things that are fucking disgusting right off the bat. While Elizabeth sees an advertisement about the substance where it's the same person but in two different bodies, as they have to share one another, and she isn't interested at first until she decides to order one for herself. The next day comes, and Elizabeth sees she's being replaced in the newspaper by Harvey, aka her dirtbag of a boss, as she gets a package that says her substance number, which is 503, and she walks to a place where she picks up the product. But so far, this movie is gross to look at. While, don't get me wrong, it is well made, and Demi Moore is going to probably win the Best Actress Oscar, despite I don't really want her to, as Fernando Torres from I'm Still Here should probably get that Oscar. But as she gets overshadowed by another character she's going to be switched as, whom I wish got a nomination, as she stole the show from me, in my opinion, but I'll get to her in a few minutes. Elizabeth gets the instructions as she does switch to a younger body, and when another body pops out of her, she becomes Sue, played by Margaret Qualley, whom I just reviewed in The Nice Guys, as she's Andie MacDowell's daughter, and have reviewed her before, and she's the one who stole the show from Demi Moore, in my opinion. And I have to ask, why didn't she get an Oscar nomination for this performance? As I felt like she got snubbed as far as the Oscars are concerned. And this does feel like a body horror, like the David Cronenberg's I'll talk about that in a sec. As this movie pulls that off fine, but it's not generally speaking my favorite kind of horror. And the only good film I could think of, and I could think of two movies as one pulled it off while the other didn't, in my opinion. And what's the one that pulls it off? David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly from 1986. While the other one that didn't pull it off for me was Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan. And when Margaret Qualley's character is born, fun fact, the body that was here is not really was not really her body, as it was someone else's body, as I couldn't say who, because I don't have an answer to that. But despite I don't like the characters, Qualley's performance was was, in my unpopular opinion, much better than Demi Moore's, in my opinion. But although she is going to win that Oscar, Demi Moore, I mean, because she stole because Margaret Qualley stole the show for me, and I would have rather watched her, as that was what this movie focused on for most of it. Not all of it, but most of it, as Demi Moore is barely in this movie, and I don't know, I can't get a fucking sense out of this shit. Sue stitches up Elizabeth, and stitches, to be honest with you guys, creeps me the fuck out, but I had to look at the screen at times despite it was troubling to watch, and the shots are well done in that scene. And don't get me wrong, this movie is well made, but I find the concept of the movie rather fucking weird for me to begin with, as Sue auditions to become the next Elizabeth Sparkle, and she gets the part because Harvey is very impressed with her audition and wants to hire her straight up in front of the studio executives. And I'm thinking, does Harvey not know it's Elizabeth as a young woman while he comes up with a new name for his assistant Isabella named Cindy? As that feels fucking disrespectful, and he comes off like a selfish idiot to begin with. And she asks of Harvey to come in every other week as she has to take care of her mother and gets to work and on her new show Pump It Up. And so far this plot, I get it, but like I said, I don't know how many times I'm going to say this. It's very fucking weird to begin with. And I'm sure the screenwriter director Coralie Farragate will not get the best original screenplay Oscar, as I'm thinking it might be either The Brutalist or A Real Pain with Jesse Eisenberg compared to this movie, in my opinion. Elizabeth comes to the office and finds Harvey and gives her a farewell gift to keep her busy as well as her stuff in the office, and she gets upset and thinks, not if I see you as Sue, you motherfucker. As I get that look Demi Moore's Elizabeth is giving Dennis Quaid's Harvey, she leaves and comes back and gets her next round of the substance and changes into Sue, while she has a shirt on but is in her underwear. While she thinks of a place where to put the body of Elizabeth and makes a door for her to lay in, while her jackass of a neighbor Oliver knocks rather aggressively on the door and tries to complain until he's in love with Sue. And the makeup and hairstyling is well done in this movie, particularly when I get to the end of the movie, and I'll get there when I get there. Sue films Pump It Up, and when I hear that title, I think of the song in the 1990s. As she goes rather erotically, and the camera, I felt like, was focusing on her ass too much. And as it got kind of boring after a while, and honestly, when movies show nudity almost too often, like after The Wolf of Wall Street, for example, don't get me wrong, I really did like that movie, but I get kind of bored with it after a while, the nudity's sakes. And to be perfectly blunt, this movie is too long at 2 hours and 21 minutes, and it kept going on over and over again, and with Sue and Elizabeth, as Sue was enjoying it a little too much, while Elizabeth gets annoyed with it, and Sue gets the attention of a biker dude named Diego, who comes off like a prick to Elizabeth later in the movie, and he comes off unlikable anyways, while Sue bleeds from the nose and ears. And I thought, for fuck's sakes, don't do anything stupid like giving yourself more time, which is something she'll do anyways. And if I were to be honest, some of this could have been in the editing room floor, as I don't care for Elizabeth all that much, nor do I care for Sue, or any of the fucking characters for that point, but I do like the performances, though. As Elizabeth sees too many beer bottles while her finger gets ugly and weird looking because Sue decided to give herself more motherfucking time compared to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth tries to clean it off, but she unfortunately can't and tries to reverse it, and the monitor of the substance says there's no going back to what Sue did in the first place. And how fucked up was this movie while Elizabeth sees Sue on the TV as she's becoming a phenomenon, and Elizabeth seeing Oliver at the door but doesn't answer the door, as this motherfucker is absolutely fucking creepy. And Elizabeth picks up the next round and sits in a diner and sees the nurse as an older man who followed her to the diner, as he looks like an elderly person and knows how long it takes, and bumps into Diego on a motorcycle, and he comes off like an asshole to Elizabeth, accidentally bumping into him. And at this point, I'm having problems with this movie while it's so far in the middle of the road for me. Like, I like it and I don't at the same time. Elizabeth calls Fred, who bumped into her in the beginning of the movie, and asks if she could get a drink with him that very night. And she goes back and forth with her makeup while we get to nighttime. And I thought, Jesus, quit making your face makeup even worse as she does on the lips. And it almost looked like Heath Ledger's face as the Joker in The Dark Knight, where it's also on the side of his lips because he cuts them while shaving his face, which isn't the case with this movie. One night, or yeah, you get what I'm talking about. But this scene was going on for a bit too long while she blows Fred off. And I felt so bad for Fred as he was nice to her from the first frame of when he showed up, and she completely blows him off while looking like the fucking Joker from The Dark Knight and messed up her hair. And honestly, this movie is struggling for me to get through, as I felt when I first saw this back in theaters. We move on to Sue filming a scene for the show and gets a bump on her ass. And when she stands back up, she suddenly disappears in the control room, notices it too, and she goes to her dressing room to take 5 minutes as she feels her ass growing and gets it out of her belly button. I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck is this? As a chicken comes out of her belly button? And thank God it was just a dream, but at the same time, it really pissed me off. Sue sees all the chicken and food Elizabeth eats and throws it out and calls Ling the substance. And as she walks into the studio and is told Harvey wants to see her right away, and Harvey tells her they're going to put her on at nighttime, and the people want more of her. And by the people, do they mean men out there? As the show feels like a goddamn pornography for perverts and takes too much advantage of existing, but not as Elizabeth, and keeps saying one more day and taking her part out of the substance until Elizabeth wakes up and gets more uglier than ever. And that is a fantastic makeup job, by the makeup artist, by the way. And Elizabeth calls the substance and is asked if she would like to stop, while she learns she won't get her beautiful self back, as, like I said, Sue is taking too much advantage of taking the substance from Elizabeth, and she cracks a bone on her leg, and that was painful to watch. And she unwraps Harvey's gift of a fresh cuisine book and cooks while she sees Sue on the TV and mocking her, as she says she's never heard of Elizabeth. And that felt very awkward, as this movie, like I said, is very weird to me. Just Jesus. Elizabeth bangs her head after seeing Sue on the TV, while Sue wakes up and takes so much substance away from Elizabeth for 3 whole motherfucking months straight, as she's hosting a New Year's show, and she goes in the bathroom and suddenly bleeds from her nose versus ears like she did earlier in the film, as she calls the substance and learns she's drained Elizabeth's body was no other option than to switch to Elizabeth, while the guy she sleeps with has to take a leak, and Elizabeth wakes up and tells Sue's boyfriend to get the fuck out of her apartment, and it scares the shit out of him as he runs out naked, which I guess was hilarious. But Elizabeth calls the substance to tell him she wants to fucking stop. Well, I can't believe this is a nominee for Best Picture, and I don't believe this will get the Oscar for Best Picture, as it doesn't deserve it, in my opinion. Elizabeth runs out of the apartment and sees Oliver and tells him to fuck off, and picks up the termination potion to terminate Sue. And when she gets to the end of the potion, she sees the flowers and supporters of Sue, and Elizabeth stops and pounds the heart of Sue, and she gains more of the substance, and all of a sudden Sue wakes up, Jesus, and fights Elizabeth, and I'm thinking, shit! Elizabeth took quite a beating, as this fight sequence was just brutal to watch. Excuse me. While the screams on Sue sounded like an arrogant zombie, and the score was just horrific, as it scared the hell out of me. For example, when Elizabeth hits her head in the sink, and Sue smashing Elizabeth's head on the mirror and bleeds to death, and goes back to the living room, and Sue beats up on Elizabeth, and I'm starting to think this movie is kind of a mess, but not as messy as the John Travolta, Nicolas Cage film Face Off. And I was getting vibes from that god-awful film, and I hate to compare that film to this movie, to this movie, and this is better than made than Face Off. Sue gets to the studio and gets ready to host the New Year's show, and she doesn't feel good after beating up on Elizabeth, and she coughs up like this and sees her teeth is falling apart, and she's horrified and washes herself up and bumps into Harvey as well as the shareholders while she's afraid to show her teeth. And I have to confess, I don't like to show my teeth either when I smile, so I don't blame Sue for that. And if anyone got the wrong idea, no, my teeth are not broken off. You could see it right here, as I recall anyways, while Sue goes outside and the studio as she goes back home and gives herself the better version of herself as she gets another body out of herself. And this is when the movie goes to weird places at the end of the day, as someone wakes up looking like the two bodies of Elizabeth and Sue, combining as the makeup in that scene was absolutely well done. As this was reminding me of the body horror of David Cronenberg's The Fly, mixed with sadly Black Swan, as that they call this thing Alyssa Sue, which makes sense for the reason I just brought up. Alyssa Sue fixes its hair, as it goes to the studio looking like this, as it doesn't know how to introduce itself to the world, and she puts the face of Elizabeth on its face, and she's up in 5 minutes and imagines a crowd while they're sitting in the studio until Alyssa Sue shows up to the stage looking like the monstrosity it looks. And as soon as Elizabeth's face falls from a magazine falls off, people scream like they're horrified as it talks, and it sounds like a man/monster, and it looks like it's giving a birth. Like, I swear to God, it was spitting out some body parts, which is super fucking disturbing in so many levels, while Alyssa Sue, it says to the audience, it's still Sue or Elizabeth, as I can't go with while they're calling it a freak and a monster, and it's getting bigger and bigger and sprays so much blood. People leave the auditorium while the music in that scene was very distracting. While there were kids in that audience that were getting sprayed on blood on them, and I thought, Jesus, this is not only disturbing but disgusting, as well as it's all over the studio. And Alyssa Sue runs out and lands on and explodes on Elizabeth's Star of Fame, and I can't tell if she's getting up or only her head, and it crawls like a caterpillar, and a street sweeper cleans up the mess that was either the hamburger mess or a bloody mess. As the climax was weird, as I like the movie, but I don't. And what do I mean by that? Let's get to the rating. I'll give this movie a 5.0 out of 10. Don't get me wrong, though. I get it's well made, and Demi Moore might win the Best Actress Oscar, as she was tremendous in the role, as she was while I prefer Fernanda Torres from I'm Still Here's performance compared to hers. And despite I don't like any of the characters too much, I like the performance of Margaret Qualley to me, she stole the movie from Demi Moore, and she's barely in the movie, and this movie focuses on Sue quite a bit, and I don't know why she didn't get nominated for this performance, as she was snubbed as far as the Oscars are concerned. And I get the plot of this, but this movie is fucking weird to begin with as a concept. The makeup and hairstyling is well done in this movie, even when Sue got more and more uglier at the end of the movie. And to be brutally honest, this is a little too long at 2 hours and 21 minutes. Some of it could have been in the editing room floor, as I kind of got bored with too much nudity in this movie after The Wolf of Wall Street, which, don't get me wrong, I really did like The Wolf of Wall Street. I reviewed it a long time ago, and some of the shots were too focused on Sue's ass. And I don't care for Sue nor Elizabeth or any of these fucking characters, as they come off very unlikable from the start of the movie. At the end of the day, the movie was very fucked up, while there's things I like and things I don't like, and I can't explain it all in one sentence. As that was what the rest of the show is for, and I like the movie, but at the same time I don't. Like, as this is a very weak, like, the weakest recommendation for this movie, as I got 2 movies out of this body horror system, as one I liked and one I didn't, and the one I liked that pulls it off very well, in my opinion, is David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly from 1986, and the other that doesn't do it well for me is Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, So that's why I'm giving it the rating I am giving this movie, because there were problems with it, in my opinion, and it could have been better as far as I'm concerned. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and coming up next, I will be back with Wicked. And until then, and the Oscar goes to...